Okay, you caught me. I've never played the masterpiece that is Final Fantasy VII. I just really haven't been in the mood for... Final Fantasy VII is just one of those games that cements itself as a legend within video game history. Its pop culture influence, characters, and yes, even plot points precede it. So it's honestly shocking to me that I haven't spoiled this game for myself just out of sheer curiosity. Final Fantasy VII released on January 31st, 1997, and would go on to receive high critical acclaim, capturing the GOTYs, the GOT-Ds, and also the GOT-Mes. In all seriousness, the game was a massive success and had a large cultural impact among those who loved games. It's no surprise that SquareEnix would want to up-res that experience and bring it once again to old and new audiences. I was ecstatic at the announcement of Final Fantasy VII Remake. Finally, I would be able to discover the characters, the story, and the legend that defines this game. Or at least the first part of it. Keep in mind, all footage shown throughout this review will contain minor spoilers for the first few chapters. Most footage equivalent to the demo for Final Fantasy VII Remake on the PS4, and some location scenes from later chapters. Additionally, my characters are currently leveled higher and have access to abilities unlocked later in the game, so don't dismay if the combat looks too easy here. With Final Fantasy VII Remake, director Tetsuya Nomura and co-directors Naoki Hamaguchi and Motomo Toriyama sought to expand the sections of the game that take place within Midgar, the corporation-controlled, smog-ridden city our story starts in. The remake covers about 5 hours of the original game, however, expands that gameplay into a complete 30 to 40 hour experience. With such an increase in content, it may seem on the outside that Final Fantasy VII Remake is going to be packed with filler, and although in some places that may seem true, the remake's contents feel beneficial. If I didn't know the game lengths, I would think the original had most, if not all, this content and dialogue to begin with. The game introduces a colorful and packed cast of characters, each that I found to be quite interesting as they develop and grow together throughout the game. I was surprised how interested I was in playing the main character, Cloud Strife. From the outside looking in, Cloud just seems like a stereotypical kick-ass chew-gum-esque hero. However, carries some plot baggage as an ex-soldier that eats up my attention every time he reminisces about the past. Of the accompanying crew, I think Barrett and Jesse were my absolute favorites. These two have some dramatic and some hilarious moments throughout the game, and again, backstory elements that kept me wanting more of their characters shown on screen.
Well, so much for having Cloud do all the fighting. There are some places a sword just can't reach.
At times, the dialogue has some interesting phrasing and timing. Take this scene in Chapter 1, for example.
Look what we have here.
A laser security system. Great.
Those things will hurt more than your pride if you're careless. They'll cut you down to size and then some. But I'm guessing you've done this kind of thing before.
Yeah. Figure out the timing of the lasers. Then, make a move when they cycle off.
Exactly. I'll go first. Nothing like a little danger to get the blood pumping.
Most games here would just give the player a notice of the laser damage and allow them to figure out the timing aspect. Here, Cloud, along with Jesse, give the player a detailed and lengthy explanation of the mechanic. I found this similar over-explanation through exposition cinematics and other aspects of the game. I felt myself at times saying, yeah, I get it, and it did pull me away from the experience from time to time. Perhaps this is typical in a JRPG or a Final Fantasy game, as this was my first full experience in both of those categories. Eventually, I learned to love and embrace the charm within some of these long-winded statements, and found a piece of the game's identity through it. Similarly, I thought certain happenstances, especially within the later chapters, seemed a bit far-fetched, almost too coincidental. However, this is a sci-fi fantasy JRPG, with the main protagonist wielding a 6-foot-long, 1-foot-wide solid sword, so I'll excuse the coincidental and far-fetched for now. There were points in time where random cutscenes and homages that I assumed to the original game popped up. I didn't quite understand these, and I definitely think these are callbacks for fans of the original. Specifically, there's one scene that shows a character we are never introduced to throughout the entire story for about 5 seconds, and then never makes note of it again. This was obviously kind of weird to me, and isn't something that typically happens in a single-player, story-driven experience. The overall narrative Final Fantasy VII Remake sets up is one of epic proportions. I thought the story beats landed well, and the game, although being a snippet of the original, wrapped itself in a neat package. As the story kept me engaged, albeit slow at times, I found the gameplay to be my absolute highlight of the experience. The gameplay involves each playable character wielding a basic attack that fills up the ATB gauge. This gauge allows you to interact with stereotypical RPG turn-based actions, such as using unique character abilities and magic. As your party grows, you can swap between individual characters, and if you get real good, you can use characters to combo abilities on top of each other. As you progress, additional elements are added to combat that just make it mwah. I absolutely love this combat system. It felt dynamic, it felt engaging, and it kept me going. I've always found the thought of long, turn-based RPGs with random encounters intimidating to start. With this healthy mix of turn-based elements and hack and slash, I couldn't put the controller down. This Final Fantasy felt oh so accessible in that way. I can experience the legendary story and enjoy all aspects of the combat. It's too good to be true. As the game progresses, you'll be thrown into situations that cause you to really think critically about how you're engaging enemies. At first, I found myself disregarding spells entirely, and then when I discovered the accessibility, I found myself becoming reliant on spells to gain elemental weakness damage. But due to the combat system and varied enemy types, this one-note approach didn't suffice for all my battles, and I eventually had to start thinking on the fly to keep the crew alive. The flipping between characters and different playstyles kept me engaged and made me feel like I was growing a connection to the character. Throughout the game, you'll find items called materia that allow you to access certain abilities and spells. Along with weapon upgrades, these items allow you to make your characters your own. For example, for me, Barret was an all-out defensive tank and healer. The way I chose to play him makes Barret my own. In my version of the game, he's a guardian, a leader who makes sure everyone is cared for and a morale booster. If I were to choose a more damage-based Barret, he'd still narratively be a protector, but one that protects with force and leads by facing the situation head-on. Both playstyles fit his story, and both let you make Barret, and the others, your own. Difficulty-wise, I would say the game is actually fairly inconsistent. On normal difficulty, most battles to me felt like a walk in the park, and then there are certain enemies and bosses that feel like I just activated the pain train. I also found that items such as the Phoenix Down, which allows you to revive a fainted party member, were readily available and affordable. At times, it did feel cheap that I could have this ongoing revival effort to keep the party alive. But if I didn't have this for a couple of the boss battles in particular, the game would have been twice as long for me. Hard mode says no to items, so I think that they have a solid purpose in place as a resource management aspect of the initially available game modes. Speaking of boss battles, Final Fantasy VII Remake really delivers, with some that made me feel thrust into a dope, fateful battle, and a few that felt unnecessary and felt a little forced. Adding onto the core gameplay, there's a healthy serving of fetch and kill side quests to keep you occupied and get invested with in Midgar. Most of these I thought were busy work, more or less, to let you explore around a bit more. Some added minor details to the world that are nice little tidbits. Not necessary, but nice. Visually, the game is beautiful. There are some obvious cut corners with static background images to supplement your surroundings at times that did feel a little odd, but the game already comes on 2 discs. How much more can you stuff in? I thought at times the different locations did feel samey. You're going to see a lot of blues, grays, and greens, but that makes sense. We're in one city throughout. And as ubiquitous as it seemed it could feel, setting-wise, I did think there were areas of Midgard that had a distinct flavor. Each pre-rendered cutscene felt like it was ripped from a movie. Very high quality from SquareEnix here. I'm a big fan of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and as a consequence, now excited to jump into the original. As a Final Fantasy and JRPG newbie, I found the beautiful and fluid combat system to be my hook. Although I did desire a bit more depth within the character's development throughout the course of the game, I thought the story was captivating and left me excited for the next installment. If you're as enthralled with the legacy behind the PS1 classic like I was, and looking for an adventure and an entry into the Final Fantasy games, Final Fantasy VII Remake is a fantastic place to start, and a game that stands alone as well as any other.